Greetings from the Tower of Lepanto. This is Father Angelo with Standing Fast, a weekly commentary on Catholic life in the public square. Well, it hasn't been exactly weekly, and I apologize. I haven't been faithful to my weekly posting, but I'm going to try to get at least 5 out for the next 5 weeks and then keep up with it in the future. Today I want to talk to you about the difference between secular chivalry and religious chivalry. Nowadays there are a lot of efforts to reinvigorate the ideals of chivalry, and a lot of them are secular. For example, the Society for Creative Anachronisms is a group, and there are many different divisions of it, and there are other kinds of groups that are like it. These people are involved with historical reenactments and wearing the clothing, doing the sword fighting, all the fun stuff like jousting, but also recreating the whole atmosphere, including the speech. They have heralds and scribes and all of that. And along with that, there is a code of ethics that they're trying to cultivate, but it's not specifically Christian. Even though they're reproducing Western chivalry, the chivalry of Western Europe, they've sort of left Christianity as a kind of option, and sometimes even some of these groups are cultivating Celtic spirituality and a kind of neo-pagan kind of spirituality. So we might think that this phenomenon is new, that this sort of secular effort to reinvigorate Western chivalry is a new thing, but in fact there's always been both a secular and a religious kind of chivalry. In fact, the word chivalry itself simply means cavalry. The knight was a cavalryman, and so the etymological meaning of chivalry really doesn't have any ethical connotation. It was only because of what chivalry represented, this military necessity, that the ethical code came to be. What happened was that the cavalryman was the most effective weapon in the Middle Ages. The mounted knight with armor and the horse with all the equipment was a tremendous weapon, and it was also a very expensive weapon. So for the knight to be able to have a horse and horses, which is what he needed, and the equipment and the squires and the whole retinue that went with him to be able to fight in battle as a knight, he had to be wealthy. So the knights were simply the noble class. I mean, it was almost synonymous to be a noble, and a knight was synonymous. And it was a military vocation to be a noble. So what you had then in the Middle Ages were all these really rich people running around with the most dangerous military equipment and weapons that existed. And so it was necessary and they were very often working for themselves. They were looking to extend their own domains and protect their own domains. So it became necessary to cultivate a code of ethics, to moderate their behavior, to moderate their ferocity. And that happened in many places, not just in Western Europe. It also happened in Japan, something similar, and it happened also in Islam. In fact, some scholars say that Western chivalry developed out of Islamic chivalry, which I'm not an expert historian, but I think we should be careful to suggest that because Islamic chivalry might have been a little earlier, that it was what really gave rise to Western chivalry. There was a fundamental need for a code of ethics for these knights. And in the West, what created that code of ethics was the church. And in fact, the bishops and the monasteries were very concerned about the behavior of the knights, who were often quite ferocious and preyed upon the peasantry and upon even destroying fields and things like that. So the church was very eager to cultivate a Christian form of ethics for these knights, and that's why out of the etymological root of chivalry, which simply means cavalryman, you get this idea that it's a code of ethics, that it's a way of life, it's a way of thinking. And the church had things like the peace of God, which was a code by which the knight was not to prey upon the clergy or upon peasantry, and you had the truce of God, sacred times such as Holy Week, where the knights were not to make war on other Christian nations or domains. This was all part of this effort to give these very powerful and ferocious men something to live by, an ideal, and something stable to moderate their behavior. So there's always been this tendency towards a code of ethics associated with military life, but in the West it was specifically Christian and most specifically Catholic. And what was unique in the West in terms of the way chivalry developed was the way that the knights treated women, the ideal of chivalrous behavior in regard to the relationship of the sexes. That was something unique to Western chivalry, at least in terms of the exalted ideal that Western Europe had of women, which is in a real way based upon devotion to the Blessed Mother. And later on, in the later times of chivalry, with the development of the Arthurian legends, we became more and more focused on the relationship between men and women in chivalry, to the point where chivalry has become, in later ages, not so much a code of ethics, but a kind of manners, which is not bad. Manners are not bad, but manners by which a man can treat a woman in such a way that he can become suave and debonair. So that ferocious fighting spirit that needed to be moderated in chivalry has somewhat been lost, and we've come up with suave womanizers, basically, is what happened. And a lot of what you see in the Arthurian legends is precisely that. Lancelot, who was a fighting man, and he was a great fighting man, ultimately was not chivalrous, at least until his conversion at the very end after the death of Arthur, because he was an adulterer. And to some extent, in the later part of the Middle Ages, with Eleanor of Aquitaine, the ideals of courtly love were part of this disintegration of the code of ethics, where adultery became sort of became the thing to do, the way to live, and so more and more chivalry connected itself with pagan ideals, and there was a lot of pagan ideals associated with chivalry in the Middle Ages. But the specific contribution of Western chivalry was its Catholic element and its Marian element, and it's the way in which chastity was held in high regard. So the virtues of chivalry are specifically religious virtues. Loyalty, before anything else, has to be based upon fidelity, and fidelity has as its root faith, and faith, before anything else, is faith in God. We need God's grace to maintain both our ideal as the church militant and as the church of our Blessed Lady, the Queen of Courtesy. So until the next time, I'm Father Angelo Mary with Standing Fast. God bless you and keep the faith.